Okay, another Navy adventure. The year is 1957. It's the last week in June, and I am a naval reservist out on the Kenneth M. Willett, which is a destroyer escort, and we've been through weeks of training in the Caribbean. We're on our way home, and I had finished radar school the year before, and I was training on radar. I was working in CIC, which is Combat Information Center. So I was on the radar. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and rather bored watching an empty scope. So I flipped the dial on out to 100 miles to look around. Now, normally when you search for ships, you search at 20 miles, because at 20 miles is as far as you out on the ocean as you can search without getting into the problem of the ship disappearing over the curvature of the earth. But if you're searching for aircraft, you search at 100 miles or even 200 miles. So I flipped the radar off on up to 200 miles, and a third of the screen was covered with some kind of contact. The officer of the deck was standing next to me, and he asked me what it was. Well, me being a trainee, I didn't know. So he told me to go wake up my chief and find out what that was. So I did. I went down and woke up my chief, and he come up. He took one look at that screen, and he just turned pale, and he said, "Oh my God." He told the OD that it was some kind of a huge storm coming at us. He asked for its ETA, and I gave it to him. We had about 40 minutes before we were into it. He recommended to the OD to go to general quarters, and then he left to go wake up the captain. So the OD got on the horn and started announcing general quarters, man your battle stations. This is not a drill. This is not a drill. Well, I was sitting there trying to figure out how serious this thing was, because everybody started running around really heavy and fast. When you go to general quarters, the ship is locked down for watertight integrity. All the boilers come online. You're ready for the flank speed, which is the fastest speed that ship can go. And they were waiting to hit the storm. So it took about 20 minutes of that before the ship was totally ready, and everybody was in places, and the captain announced that we were coming into some kind of a big storm, and he wanted all the crew on the outside to get inside the ship, except the gunners in the 5-inch mounts, which were enclosed in steel. And it was a storm we were going to deal with, not some kind of a enemy. And so with this happening, one of the officers asked me and my partner on the radar to come up to the bridge. He said, "Radar's no good in a storm, so we want you to come up to the bridge and be lookouts for look for other ships." And I said, okay. So we went up there, and they gave us this heavy foul weather gear and big slickers and rain hats and stuff. And then he proceeded to tie me to the rail up on the bridge. It was an open bridge. You could it had a steel deck on the top of it, but it was open on the side, so you could see out freely. And I was tied to the railing, or the stanchions there in the corner of the bridge on the starboard side, and my partner was tied to the stanchions on the port side. And then he gave me a knife, which looked more like a bayonet than a knife, and told me that if the ship went under, why, I could cut myself loose. And I thought, yeah, I'm sure I can do that. But at that time I was not that worried. And so with the ship ready, and we just happened to have a special guy on board that was a expert at helmsmanship. He could run that ship better than anyone. He could control it. He just had that natural talent. So they got him up there and put him on the wheel, and then the officers tied themselves down. There's about 5 officers on the bridge, and I was real close to it there, so I could hear all of what was going on the bridge. Well, that storm hit in about 10 or 15 minutes with heavy rain and hail coming down in just literally buckets, and then quickly followed by waves reaching heights of 20 and 30 feet high going over top of the ship. And it wasn't long before they had reached 40 feet high and were going over the top of the ship. The captain got a message from down below, and they said the ship was in the bilges. The water was coming in so fast in the bilges that they couldn't pump it out with the bilge pumps. So one of the officers, who was operation officer, he asked them to see if they could rig the fire hose pumps, and which they did. They rigged the fire hose pumps to reverse so they would pump the water out. And with all of these pumps going, they radioed back that they were about holding even, that they were just about holding even with the water coming in. The water was coming in through the stacks and through the air vents and stuff that just couldn't be closed to operate a ship. And those waves kept building and building, and they got up to 50 feet high in no time at all, and the ship was wallowing in the troughs, and it was teetering on the tops of it, and I was trying to look out there, and by this time I was thoroughly scared. And the ship would roll, and then it would just barely come back up, taking time, and they had a roll meter there. It wasn't too far from me, and I looked at that, and one of the guys was talking about it, and he said, well, this ship can't take a roll more than 32 degrees, and even that's possible. He said a 32, 33 degrees roll is going to capsize the ship. So I started watching that roll meter, and those rolls were already up to about 28 degrees, and this was no comfort to me as I was looking out. And then on the radio there come this message that from the Coast Guard. The captain was radioing the Coast Guard every 5 minutes with our position where we were at, and the Coast Guard radioed back, and he said, there's a ship that's only about 15 miles from you that's floundering. Can you give assistance? And the captain yelled into the radio. He said, hell no. He said, I can't help myself. And he would look up toward the air, and he would say, Lord, help us through this. And there was a lot of prayer going on that night too. Well, the waves just kept getting higher. The water was coming up at over 50 feet waves, and some of them were 60 feet waves that were going over top of the ship. And so I was just, after I'd been in that for about 15-20 minutes, I was just kind of numb, just watching it and trying to do the best I could with my job, and hoping that I could do it. And on the starboard side where I was, I heard a huge bang, boom. And I looked down the starboard side, and our motor whaleboat, which is a large boat that they use to take sailors to shore with, it's about I don't know, 30 feet long, maybe hold about 25 sailors. A wave had just cut that boat in two, just totally destroyed it. Part of it went into the ocean, and part of it was just hanging there on the thing, and it was banging against the ship. So the captain asked asked somebody to come out and cut that loose with an axe so it'd go into the sea and wouldn't bang a hole in the side of our ship. So here come out this group of men all tied together with rope, and they made their way over there and started hacking at the rope that held that half, and finally hacked it in two, but not before one of the sailors got his hand in between the boat and the rope and smashed his hand really bad. I didn't know the follow-up on that. I hope he still has the use of his hand, but I don't know. And then they went back inside the ship. The noise was just terrific, just horrendous. The only way you could hear anybody was just yell and shout. And down below deck, it was horrible down there. Men were being thrown into bulkheads, and the food in the gallery and the pans were everywhere. They come off the shelves, and the floors were littered, and the men down below were sick through the storm, and they were trying to tie themselves in their bunks with their sheets. Many of them were injured now, broken bones and sprained ankles and stuff like that because of being thrown into the metal sides of the ship. And the waves continued higher. They got up to about 70 feet on some of them, and I had just about given up on ever surviving that because I just didn't see how we were going to get through that. And then there was a little break in the thing, and it was not real quiet, but relatively quiet for a little while. And they said that they were passing through the eye of that storm. And so after a little bit, here it came back again, and this time was 70-foot waves, one right after the other, and the ship was just unbelievably slow from coming back from the rolls and stuff. And I looked up and I saw all the materials on the old one deck behind me. Up there we had our life rafts and our shark nets and our survival gear. All survival gear was up there, so if the ship sunk, then it would remain floating in the water and people could grab it, but it was gone. I saw it just flying up in the air with the waves and going out into the ocean. And that's everything on that ship that was not bolted down, welded down, made out of steel was gone, and the ship was being badly damaged from it. Vents were being bent or ripped off and torn, and this continued for probably another half hour, another hour, and there was really nothing to do but just sit there and pray and hope. I've never experienced anything like that in my life since either. And the captain would continue his looking up in the air and say, "Lord, help us through this," ever so often. We were taking 30-degree rolls. I seen a couple of 30-degree rolls, and I thought, we'd bought it then. But it just managed. It just shuddered and shuddered and shuddered, and then it finally just slowly came back up. We were in that storm probably 3 hours, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. I'm not for sure. Till it started to abate a little. It started to go down, and we were slowly coming out the other side. And when it finally got sure, we were just still getting hit by heavy rain, but when it became pretty well sure that we were out the other side of it, well, we kept on going for a little while because we surely didn't want to get away from it as quickly as we could. And when that was assessed that we were out of it, the captain just turned around and went back into his cabin and lay down on his bunk, and he got violently ill. He had to be carried off the ship on a stretcher when we got back to port. and I think probably just had a nervous breakdown. And so they come over and untied me. One of the officers of the deck come over and untied me, and I just slipped to the floor, or to the deck, and just huddle. It's just like, almost like I had no legs. And the officer asked me, said, "Are you all right?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm all right. I just need to rest." But it was just something I never experienced before. It's like I wasn't there down below. So I just sat there in a heap for maybe about 30 minutes, and I started getting calm enough to kind of get up, and it was just about time for the sun to come up. The sun was beginning to come up, so I went on back to CIC to see if I could help there. And then when I got in there, I found out that the radar was inoperative, because the radar antennas had been smashed beyond control, and there was no radar. And so they were trying to figure out where exactly we were in the Gulf after this happened, and so I did what I could to help them on the DRT to find out where we were at. We were 150 miles off course when we got through that. So we just slowly turned the ship around and went back down to half speed, and started back for our Mississippi, or New Orleans was our base, but we had to go up to the Mississippi Channel there to get to it. And we certainly didn't want to catch up with the hurricane. I didn't think there was any danger of catching up with it, since it was moving at about 70 miles an hour. But we started on up there. Well, when everything got under control and we started back up, why, I went up to the 01 deck, where that's when I discovered there was nothing up there anymore except steel. And so I just sat down against the pole, trying to rest a little bit and get myself together. And the sun was coming up, and when the sun came up, I noticed something that I've never ever seen before. That ship was no longer navy gray. It was white. It looked like a ghost ship, like you see in pictures. The salt had impacted that ship so strongly that it was almost white. And when the sun glinted off, you could see crystals shining through there. You could take your finger and rub it on the ship and then taste it, and you could taste the salt that was on that ship. It just covered with salt. So when we got back up to the Mississippi and started up that last port, the people on the shore started coming out and looking at our ship, and they would run back in and say, you know, pull people out. I couldn't hear them, but I could see them waving their arms and looking at it. It was kind of like a holiday. They were clapping for us and waving at us, and they all knew what had happened. And so all the way up the Mississippi, we got this kind of greeting. And as soon as we reached port in New Orleans, why, there were ambulances waiting and buses waiting, and the paramedics come running on the ship and started helping the people off that were injured. We didn't have anybody that was killed, thank goodness, but we had a lot of injuries, a lot of small injuries. I was one of them that had no injuries, and the guys that stayed in the 5-inch guns mounts, they did real well, because they didn't even have to look at the storm. And so when they got them all off the ship, why, they put the rest of us that were still in normal shape into the bus and took us down to the barracks. Now I found out later that what we had encountered was Hurricane Audrey. Audrey was a Class 4 hurricane, and it had sunk 3 ships that were around us. And when it got to shore, it hit part of Texas and part of Louisiana. It killed over 400 people and left over 10,000 homeless when it made landfall. How we got out of that, I'll never know. But I was very grateful for it, and that's an experience I would not like to repeat. And thank you all for listening to me.